So everybody heard the record button come on. So now we're going to start our program. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Fisher from the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive, and we're really glad that everybody is here today. We have outstanding attendance for an outstanding program. So if you're new to the program, or if you haven't been around for a while and you'd like this sort of thing, drop us a note in the chat or contact us at info@pnraarchive.org, and we can put you on the mailing list for future programs. So just a couple of notes about the schedule. For those of us that were in the pregame show, I mentioned that we've got a Squiminar on the Seattle and North Coast coming up next Saturday, March 9th, 2024, at the Dungeness River Nature Center in Sequim, Washington. Now, I've got good news. You don't have to swim out there to attend this. You can watch it online, courtesy of the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive. And if you go to the PNRA Archive website, there's a link there for you to be able to sign up and watch this program on Zoom and watch it again in the future on YouTube. 6 months of my life, Bob, I'll never get back. It's like a soccer game. But it's sure been fun, and the community is really excited. And of course, all the great stories and stuff, most of which we can't repeat in a family setting. So coming up after that, on March 13th, our friend Trent Stetz, who's here somewhere, there he is. Trent is going to be with us. And Trent, can you just tell us a little bit about your program here coming up in 2 weeks and who you're working with?
Microphone. Hi.
Yeah, but volume is better.
We're going to be talking about the railway within the Oregon Zoo, which is called the Washington Park and Zoo Railway, which has existed since 1959. I'm going to be presenting with Kathy Codell, who is currently the president of the Friends of the Washington Park and Zoo Railway. It's kind of a two-part presentation. I'm doing a little bit on the history. She's doing a little bit on the current events. It's been out of... And part of it's been out of service for a number of years, so we're working to get that back into service. So it's a bit of history and a bit of what's going to happen next.
And and the good thing, Bob, about this is that this is a new group that's never been on our program before. So this will be a first chance appearance for them. Other events that we've got coming up in the merry month of March, we have is Jim Trenzo here? Jim?
Yes, I am here.
Jim, could you please explain to us what the Pennsylvania Railroad and Technical Historical Society is going to be up to on March 23rd?
Yes, on March 23rd, we're having our regular Pacific Northwest chapter meeting at the archive. And the featured speaker will be Bill Myers. And he's going to speak on the Pennsylvania Railroad's mountain locomotive, M1, M1A, and M1B. And after that, we will hopefully, I think I've got my hands on a video presentation on how an author remodeled his early brass M1 engine. That'll be followed by a movie, and we always like to have dinner at Vince's across the street. And so if there's anybody out here in Radio Land who is interested in joining us, feel free. It's Saturday, March 23rd. We start at 12:30. We usually arrive early. Some people run over to the electric train shop. Others just come to visit. If you have son, daughter, grandchildren, wife who's interested in coming along, the more the merrier.
Fantastic. And just a reminder, this is at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive office at 425 Southwest 153rd Street in beautiful downtown Burien, Washington. Also that weekend on March 24th, we have the rare pleasure of enjoying Gordon Glattenberg, nationally known photographer. His collection is part of the Center for Railroad Photography and Arts collection. And he will be, I just looked at it yesterday, folks. It's just fantastic. This presentation on railroads in Canada. And it starts in the Maritimes and makes it all the way across to the Yukon. These are all original pictures by Gordon. And that's going to be a great program too. So we've got a lot of really good programming going on. And if you guys are interested, folks are interested in this stuff, you know, come spend some time with us because we've got some just great stuff going on. And in fact, on that note, the Great Northern Railway Historical Society, one of the partners of PNRA, Bob Kelly, is here. And Bob, what are you nice folks at the Great Northern up to this spring?
Well, we're focused on the convention that's coming up in the fall.
Okay.
So it's going to be kind of interesting. It's going to be at the Delta Hotel in Everett, but it's a joint kind of thing where the Great Northern Society actually follows the Northern Pacific. So the NP group will start their convention, I think it's on the 11th. And on the 14th, we're having a joint swap meet kind of event. And then the Great Northern Society will take over the hotel and proceed on to the 18th. And both organizations are going to go out to Snoqualmie, and they're going to run the steam engine for us. And we'll be able to see the Great Northern 1246 that's there. So we're doing lots of focus there. And then the following Saturday is Great Northern Day in Skykomish, like we've done every year for the last 15 years or so. And it's
Now,
kind
what
of
date is that, Bob? What date?
It's the 21st
21st of
September.
September. Okay, that's what
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I was clear on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you know, we'll have a kind of an informal morning with a few presentations and a less formal even than that in the afternoon. And you know, so it's just a nice getaway. So, and September weather is pretty darn nice up there. So
Oh, it's
that's
always beautiful.
that's what I'm up to.
So, well, great. So that's just kind of a rundown of some of the activities that we have on our calendar. And, you know, but as I always tell people, you know, you didn't all come here to watch Ed Sullivan. What you really came here to do is watch Bob Kelly and have Bob Kelly talk to us about Stevens Pass. So, Bob, take it away. It's all yours.
Okay, what we're going to do is just take an overview of sort of the Great Northern's history at Stevens Pass. We'll sort of break it down into some categories and just go through a little bit about a lot of stuff. We actually are going to do a similar presentation at the GN convention, but in more detail. A lot more information is available, but what will fit here today will just be, you know, a few minutes on each topic. So let me see if I can successfully share here. You got that up there, you guys?
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay,
do.
so I see some heads knocking there. Okay, so I'm going to focus on the Great Northern at Stevens Pass, and we'll sort of pick that up and talk about these main topics. We'll talk a little bit about discovery and construction, and we're going to add a lot more about the discovery elements when we get to the convention in the fall. I mean, after the Civil War, there was kind of like a surveyor under every bush up there for a while. We'll talk about the switchbacks and how they worked out. The first tunnel is that 2.5 mile tunnel. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll spend a few minutes on Snowsheds, which I think it was something like in a 12-mile stretch. They had 9 miles of Snowsheds. A little on the Wellington Avalanche, and we'll talk about the 8-mile tunnel, which is the one that's actually in use today. Just a little bit on the electrics, Skykomish itself, and then sort of what's going on up there now, sort of some modern operations. And Jonathan, if you see any questions that come into the chat or anything, just get my attention. I'll be glad to deal with them as we go.
Thanks, Bob. I'll certainly do that, folks. Just enter those questions in the chat, and we'll take them at the end.
Yeah. So first, I wanted to mention where the sources for the data come. You know, most people put the sources at the end of the presentation when nobody's listening, so I wanted to put them up front. A lot of the material came from the Sky Society, Great Northern Archives also. A lot of the work up here with the details came from Jim Matson and the work he's done. Also, over in Kashmir, there's a great small museum that has interesting stuff that helps tell the story. And then also my cohort, Dan Cozine, helped guide us with a lot of what's important and what's not kind of information and shared maps. Let's just, for a minute, think about what we're looking at here. Here's, you know, the Stevens Pass area. And we're going to kind of put it in context. On the right, bottom right-hand corner is Wenatchee, then Leavenworth, up the Tumwater Canyon. Here's the pass itself, then down to Skykomish. So this is the area we'll be talking about. I'll have most of the material dealing right with Stevens Pass, but I may bring up some topics relating to the rest of the area. And just in a little more focus here, you can sort of plan on me talking about this main area right here, where this is the old original line, and this would be the 2.5-mile tunnel, Wellington switchback route down to Skykomish. So most of what we're talking about is here, and for those of you from far away from here, you can get an idea of where Seattle is and some of the intermediate stations. Here's Everett, and then Wenatchee, and then off to Spokane. Let's just talk discovery and construction to start with. So Great Northern Railway is what I'm focused on, and a lot of the pre-discovery work was done by actually engineers from Seattle, Lakeshore, and Union, Eastern. NP guys were up there. It's very common to read surveyors' reports where they went up the hill, and when they came back down the hill, they found a line of stakes that they didn't put there. So they were kind of up there going back and forth in several cases. And this gentleman here, John F. Stevens, is actually credited with locating the path. A lot of people get him confused with Isaac Stevens, who was the first governor of the state. And sometimes people think it's named after him. But discovery is an elusive kind of thing. It kind of comes down to a couple elements about what discovery really means. Stevens had an inkling that there was going to be a path here, and he was been way up in the hills and he had seen it. But a couple years before that, there was somebody else up there marching around, and they wrote letters to James J. Hill. And so, you wonder, did Stevens have those letters or not? And then he didn't actually go up there. He sent CFB Haskell up there to take a look at this area. Go up this creek that comes in here and see where it takes you, and take a guide with you. And he told him which guide to take. And well, engineers don't just walk through the woods, they take packers with them. So the packer he happened to pick was John Maloney, who later was the founder of Skykomish. And then even in Stevens' own words, discovery doesn't mean being the first one there. It means figuring it out and then writing about it and making the information public. So he's somewhat self-promoting of himself, but also very honest about, who got there first and so on. He certainly acknowledges Haskell and so on. But Haskell was a smart guy. When he got up there, he found a tree, and he noticed he carved his boss's name in it, Stevens Pass. So this tree was just right at the pass for many, many years. However, it unceremoniously was removed one time quietly when they expanded a parking lot, so it did not get preserved. But it was right at the pass for those of you who've actually been up there. And another element that I think is important to mention is, when the work started there, the construction started, this would be what you would call a highly mechanized situation where you have men pushing carts on rails. This was all hand labor when they started, and they didn't start with hardly any mechanisms. Here you see the horse cart. So they did lots of horse cart work and lots of, they did tunnels, but look how they did them. They did them with men and horses and some dynamite. And so it was pretty hard, and it was not pleasant work. And of course, a lot of times, as you can see here, it was in the winter. So the whole construction phase had some yings and yangs about progress and slowdowns, and they had things occurred. Stevens was sort of a bold young engineer when he went up there, and he had some maps that were sent back to St. Paul, and Mr. Hill looked at them, and he said, "Oh, this is unacceptable. Stop all work." And of course, John Stevens did not stop work, and he kept working. And his boss was E.H. Beckler. Said, "Hey, Mr. Hill's coming out," and he had never met Mr. Hill. Many people think he'd met Mr. Hill long ago, but he really had not. And Beckler told Stevens he thought at the end of the day there might be one less young engineer working for the Great Northern. He wasn't sure how that would turn out. Mr. Hill came up and looked at the situation, and just, everybody was deathly silent while he looked everything over. And he finally said, "I don't think there's anything else you can do. I think you just should proceed." And so that's actually how Hill and Stevens met, and they recounted that, and both of them did in writings many, many years later. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic of how the two met and how Stevens was bold enough. He wasn't afraid to get fired. He proceeded on with his work. And you can see the kind of stuff that they were doing. This is at Deception Creek. We'll see some pictures of this later. They were building pretty substantial, kind of things, but they weren't necessarily having the Environmental Protection Agency approve anything, or maybe getting approval for the bridges. They had some excellent woodworkers, some excellent engineers with them, and they just started building. And the concept was build this line, get it done, and we'll fix it later. And that's exactly what they did. Of course, they had some towns along the way that sprang up when they showed up. This is the one at Martin Creek, an area you can go to today. And this, I think, is probably the most established of little communities that came up. Most of them were actually tent communities or maybe a wood platform with tent on top kind of thing. But here at Martin City, they actually had a city with, roadways or walkways in a sense. And this location is fine. You can find it today if you know where to look. And but one of the things about it is that it's just totally overgrown. But of course, the thing to start looking for are these things right here. There'd be a whole lot of stumps around when you go looking for an old community like this. And notice these buildings, they actually were constructed as opposed to just being a platform kind of thing. So, and as you can see here, there were hotels and there were taverns and so on and so forth, all designed to take the money from the guys working there. You can see some of their construction techniques were clearly temporary when they started. Here's logs that haven't even had the bark taken off being used to build cribbing. And the picture was taken by ABW. You can see that in the lower right-hand corner. That's A.B. Wilsey, who was up there in 1891, 1892 time period. Took a lot of pictures, and they miraculously have been preserved. But you can see what's going on here. They're building a back wall for a snow shed of some type, probably. And you can see one guy standing down there near his hand cart. You can imagine what the work would have been like. So here's a picture that's often promoted as, so the last rail being put down. Except there's a little technical problem with that, is the last rail went down about 11:30 at night. So anytime you see pictures celebrating and people standing around with, lanterns sometimes in their hand, they're taken the next day or a few days later. But this is the track laying machine that they were using. The line actually joined close to Deception Creek, just west of Deception Creek, about 11 o'clock at night, and it was the crew on hand. There were no dignitaries. They had a couple of foremen. And in reading their accounts, essentially all I did was, shoot a few rounds in the air and say they were done. So construction was, hard work, not a lot of mechanisms to help them, and they worked right through the winter as much as they could. And this is the kind of conditions they had. You can see here where they now have installed a snow shed also, but you can see the hillside itself. It's pretty denuded. You can see that obviously that fires have been involved, and a lot of the early records of the forestry department and so on indicate that they just lit the fires to burn the hillsides on purpose so they could see where they were going, and see the hill up above and see the hill down below. So they just literally burned it. So you had conditions that were not the best, right? Not the best for the future. Okay, the other interesting thing, or those of you who maybe have not dealt with snow sheds, the concept of it is that snow up above may fall across the snow shed and end up down here to the right, but not block your line. So many of the snow sheds are sloped, and notice there's been some extra slope put on here. They must have had some snow coming in. The whole idea is to get your snow to slide down here and end up over here and not block your line. They also had problems, and they had lots of problems. If you read about them, the things that happened, but they're probably trying to get this thing right side up with manpower. So lots of pulleys and that kind of thing to get the leverage they needed to stand up when they did have errors. And of course, you get a feel here for the slope of the hillside. It's extremely dramatic right to left slope here. So when things did fall, sometimes they tumbled quite a distance. And this is the kind of crew that is involved in some of the equipment. You can see here they've got a rotary snowplow. This was after construction, of course. And one of the things that they had a big problem with right away was the snow. And they seem to somewhat underestimate this. If you go back and read about avalanches and snowslides in the time, if you read about this in 1900, 1890s, they did not really grasp the concept of snowslides other than maybe what you would read about in Switzerland or something like that. The science of snow and snowslides and the different kinds of snowslides and dealing with them was not that advanced. So in many cases, it's pretty easy to criticize, in today's level of knowledge, it's pretty easy to criticize what they did and how they built it. But if you go back and read about the technology of the day, they probably did a pretty good job. Here we are at
Wellington.
Was there a question? Okay, I'll just keep going then. Jonathan, you flagged me down if there's a question. Here we are about 1900, looking at Wellington, Washington, and you notice up here on the hill, it's very common to see these kinds of lines. This is an old switchback line here. And what this did was come clear over to the left and swing around and actually come right down here. And it helps date the photograph actually, because you can see all the groundwork here, and here's some tailings that the new tunnel had on the right, off to the right here, had been installed. But still things were pretty rough and ragged, and looks like they had just abandoned the old switchback line here. And this is the original Wellington Depot that has now been turned around, because it used to face the hillside when the trains came in this way, and now it's facing the new line. But you can also get a feeling for what the city was like, or the community was like at that time. And this would be dated approximately 1900. So a big element here are the switchbacks, and I'll just talk a little bit about them, and I'll show you some pictures of them because they're still pretty easy to see today, even 100 years later. On the east side, they had a pretty easy situation. On the west side, they had a more complicated situation. But over on the right-hand side here, the trains would come up from Leavenworth, and they would enter Switchback, and then they would back up to here and move around this way. There was a Y here in the middle of the valley they could use if they needed it. By the time they got up here to Spur A, if you were going towards Stevens Pass, you were actually backwards. You're going backwards up the Stevens Pass if you're a passenger. You're going back and forth and back and forth. But anyway, this is very easy to see today. And a lot of people think most of this is all gone, but this is actually a part of the Pacific Crest Trail right here today, this spur. And these are relatively easy to find if you go walking just above the highway. The highway today runs right through here, kind of swings like this. Let's just take a look here. Here's Highway 2 on the east side. But notice you can see these formations here. These are switchbacks. And here's the Y. Look over in the bottom left corner there. It's very easy to see this Y that was out there all on trestle work. And you can park right in this area here. And if you're bold enough, walk out there. Brush is pretty high. But this switchback line went like this around the corner, and then notice right here, you can see the last leg of the switchbacks heading for the pass. On the west side, you can see it was a bit complicated. On the right-hand side over here, on the bottom right, the switchback is where you came from Stevens Pass. And you can actually go up to Stevens Pass today where there's an active ski area. Well, maybe not today because the snow is pretty deep. If you go up there in August, you can actually walk out here on the bottom right-hand corner pretty easy. And then every time you come to a trestle, of course, it's missing and you have to go down and come back up. But you can walk here. And the highway today is right in here. But you can see they had to come out, go back. This leg went way up the valley, come back, go back, come around. You can see they ended up on then the north side of Wellington, had to swing back around. I mean, this was you're dropping about 1,200 feet in elevation to get down here to Wellington. And it was fairly exciting in the winter, and they had to shorten their trains and so on. And I think the other thing that's interesting about it is that you can see these today. It's not like it's disappeared. Here's a picture taken, long ago. But if you get in the same spot today, here on the left-hand side, you can see coming out from Stevens Pass and back here. And the reason they only went so far back here was there was a big avalanche area over in here. Came around, went way up the valley, back and forth, big curves. This is the curve that Mr. Stevens kept building after Hill said stop. This is more than a 10-degree curve right here, and that was very unacceptable to Mr. Hill, but Sean Stevens just kept working on it. After you get over to Wellington and you wind your way down past Wellington, you can come down to Windy Point, and this is the area where during the Wellington Avalanche event, they had lots of trouble, and you can see slides have come down and landed, come down and landed all along this area. If you have a real good copy of this photo, and you can zoom way in, you can actually see a few of the very early snowsheds that are on it. Here's another view, just on the west-hand side. Wellington itself is located down in the middle of the picture, out of sight, but this is the line coming off of Stevens Pass on the left. And they had a creek there called Loop for Creek, so they had water available. But you can get a feel here for what it was actually like from a railroading point of view. And again, this is one of those A.B. Wilsey photos taken right in the time period when they were building and working on it. You also can see how tall the ridges are here and how we're going down. We're ended up down here in this area here about 1,000 feet below where we're at here. So it must have been fairly exciting for the passengers. So switchbacks were a big deal, but the 2.6-mile tunnel was going to alleviate a lot of the problems they were having. So let's talk a little about that. This is kind of an interesting picture. It's the beginning on the west side of the 2-mile tunnel. And now this is all being dug by hand, by the way, at this point. This is where the tunnel started into the side of the mountain. When they actually finished it, they brought out the lining quite a distance out here to where the portal we see today is out here somewhere. But here's a train coming across the switchback. So this is an actual event where a train is coming across the switchbacks, and this is the old switchback line here. And if you stand up there today, I think the thing that I get most impressed with is, how many shovels of dirt it took to do something like this. And they had quite a crew up there. And they had to support them and feed them, and they had hospitals, and they had doctors, and they had all kinds of things going on. The rail line right in the bottom right-hand corner is that same line we just saw in the previous slide, where the train was on the switchback. And notice they've built a shed here in the bottom left-hand corner to kind of cover the trough where they were working in. This is the part of the trough here. They've also built a boiler, and they've got compressed air lines coming down, so they're beginning to use compressed air. But in all these pictures, there's some very unique things. Look right here in the middle. There's some sort of like a gazebo or something there. Never quite been able to figure out what that is, or I've never seen it on a map or anything. So it probably was, built by the crew that actually was there. Might be a hot tub or something. I don't know. Here's the opposite side. And this is at the Cascade Tunnel station. And it's interesting that even when they got through there in 1892, they named this station Cascade Tunnel, even though the tunnel was years away. They knew this is where the tunnel was going to start on the east side. And, they had some basic facilities. They had a covered turntable. But look up here in the center. You can see one of the old bridges, trestles in the switchback line. And again, this is the Pacific Crest Trail today. You walk right along here. So you get a feel for what the conditions were and what it looked like. This is the Cascade Tunnel station a little later, built up, and there's a very interesting place to walk around. But one of the most interesting things is if you look right here in the center, just to the right of the building, there's an outhouse. You can see it kind of there, and it has a chimney. And this is the first time I became aware of outhouses with chimneys. And not that you'd want to, but you can walk to this very point today and stand there. But you can see they had later a pretty sophisticated situation going on here with the eating and boarding house, and they had a big covered turntable, engine houses. You can certainly find this today. You can walk up here and find this spot easily. Right in this building, there's a big stump, so if you go walking around up there, you're going to be careful because you can easily fall into it also. But anyway, they built it up. They had family communities. They had schools here. And as time went by, they had a relatively sophisticated community also. So now I'm going to move on to Snowsheds, one of the most fascinating things up there. And for those of you who haven't dealt with Snowsheds, on the right-hand side, you can see they built a big wall here. So this happens to be a concrete rubble type wall. And this is really what sort of holds the rest of the snowshed in place. They also had plans for cribbing versions of them. They had several different plans of them. This is a concrete plan. But the idea is this is what held you against the mountain. And then you would take a solid, look at that, 12 by 12, solid and probably clear. And that would be your roof. And then have posts to support your roof. And look at the size of these posts, 20 by 16s. And a lot of this is still there, but of course it's collapsed, and you have to kind of imagine. One of the things you do find a lot of is all these pins. You find pins and bolts and fasteners all over the place up there when you walk around. So a basic concept of a snowshed here. And then here's one that is not quite as big and strong and has a back wall of concrete, but notice how they're using the cribbing. And this is in the Tumwater Canyon. What they would do is they would build these cribs, and then they just literally fill them with stone. Built cribs, fill them with stone, as many as they were in the design. And then this became a pretty big maintenance problem. None of it's treated lumber or anything like that. And they had these cranes that they would use to bring out in the summer frequently. But again, to look right through the snowshed, there's another snowshed. In this area here along the Tumwater, there was snowshed after snowshed after snowshed to keep the snow off the tracks as you headed west or east, I guess, too. Here we are at Martin Creek, and you can just imagine now, we're looking at 12 by 12 solid roof. You can imagine how many 12 by 12s you needed, plus all the posts and so on. And a lot of these here also had concrete back walls, but it was a combination of things. To give you a bit of scope, there's a gentleman standing right here. And this is the place called the Horseshoe Tunnel. So these are massive structures. And the tracks section went down here, crossed a bridge inside this mountain in the shape of a horseshoe, and then came out down here. It's about 100 feet difference in the track levels here. Came out and then right back in. So the concept here is that you got so much snow coming down and sliding, you bring it down here and it slides across this snowshed, and then it just keeps sliding across this snowshed to end up down here. But this was a constant maintenance problem or operational problem during the snow season. And then, of course, during the summer season, they had a little problem with fire. So they had quite a few provisions with hoses and so on in there, but they still did have a lot of fire trouble with these. Now, this is a kind of unique spot. It's a station called Alvin. And you can see there's a pretty steep hill. But the unique spot here, the unique thing about it is here's a snowshed, but look here. Also, there's a snowshed actually over the top of the station. So they, just had to sort of tuck the station into the side of the hill. And it's a portable station, and they just built a shed over it. Otherwise, it would be pushed into the tracks. Here's a better view of it. It's the only place I know that this has ever been done. Later, they called this place Embro, if you read about it or study about it. The other interesting thing is notice the number up here on the left-hand side. This was taken by a photographer, and he was selling photographs. So if you wanted to order a 159, you could order a 159, and they'd mail it to you for whatever the cost was. The Horseshoe Tunnel that I mentioned was pretty darn unique, and they did studies of different kinds of approaches to it. Here's an interesting one where here we are coming, the black areas are snowsheds. You can see how frequent they are coming down on the line. And what actually happened was that we curved and we went this way, the lower Horseshoe Tunnel. So we went across Bridge 400 into the Horseshoe Tunnel. and then across Bridge 401, I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. That was a very tall, dramatic thing. And then headed on down for scenic. But what was happening here was a study to look for a better grade. And they were thinking about replacing this tunnel with this tunnel, which was an option to help alleviate some bunch of water problems they had over here too. And in a lot of these kind of things, you run into them and you wonder about them, but they were just, you frequently see studies for this option or studies for that option. Once the line became a little mature, they started looking to improve it. And so frequently you run into these things and you have to realize, they never happened, although they look fairly substantial and like they might have happened. Frequently they did not. There's that Bridge 401 in steel. And so we know the picture was like after, 1900, it was wood until then. And you can just imagine, what it looked like in wood. There's a few pictures of it, not many. But look all the way on the left-hand side. Here's a telltale sitting here, entering the lower portal of the tunnel. And remember, the tunnel curves off and comes out above this track about 100 feet above to the right. And again, fairly primitive railroading, you might say. Here's that same trestle right here on the left-hand side. You can see it curving off to the left, goes into the mountain, swings around, and then comes up. And again, notice you're about to enter a tunnel because here's a telltale. So they had a shorter tunnel up here that was not a part of the original construction, but they used the true fly for a while, put a new tunnel in to begin to lower the curvature and lower the grading and so on in this area. And this today is the Iron Goat Trail. This is very easy to walk on. And you can come along here and you can actually walk up to the tunnel and look in. I don't recommend you go in. It's pretty decrepit, but you can actually be right here after about mid-July when the snow's gone. Again, you can see no ventilation. You just had to either, suck it up and go through the smoke or wait. And frequently the accounts, there's only a few accounts of going through there. It was essentially a smoke city kind of thing, and the smoke just sat there in the Horseshoe Tunnel. Didn't evacuate very often. So we've talked about several elements, but one of the ones that gets the most discussion, we'll just spend a minute or two on, is this avalanche that happened in 1910 that killed 96 people. Just to get you oriented to the whole thing, here's the 2.5-mile tunnel, Cascade Tunnel Station, which you've seen pictures of. You have a 2.5-mile tunnel. You come out to that community of Wellington, which you actually saw some pictures of. And then you go on down towards Windy Point, round the point, through the Horseshoe Tunnel, on back down, through a big curve at Scenic, and then you would head for Skykomish. Now, what happened during this event is they brought trains up Cascade Tunnel. They had a passenger train and a mail train. And they had lots of rotaries working out in this area here, and they having lots of trouble keeping it open. They actually thought they would get through because they do this every winter. And they had a big snowstorm going on, so they had brought up extra rotaries and actually borrowed one from the MP. And they took the trains and they moved them through the tunnel and parked them here. But then they got stuck. And as the rotaries kept working out in this area, they, supplies, they had to go to 2 meals a day. The train did not have a diner. They had to walk to the hotel or bring food back to the passengers. The crews were getting worn out, and it was not a good situation. Here's that tunnel that they had just come through, and they had come through with these early electrics. That's what had brought them through. They had started to work about the summer of 1909. So they came through here and got parked, and they parked right here, train 25 and train 27. And they had rotaries over here working this area, but the day before or so, they had a big snowslide here. Essentially kind of wiped out a major portion of the community. And then the word got over here that had happened, and so the people here were quite worried. Some of them actually decided to walk out, and there were 2 or 3 groups that actually did walk out. They walked along the line, came down to Windy Point, and then came down a very, very steep slope to get to scenic. But eventually what happened is they had their rotaries doubled, so one pointing east, one pointing west, so they couldn't get trapped. But eventually they got trapped. So they really had no hope of, removing any of the snow, and had one more rotary coming this way, but it was by itself, and it had to be very careful it didn't get trapped. And finally, they all got trapped. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, down comes the slide. And this was a slab avalanche, described as, like being sliced off by a knife. And it only started, 500 or 600 feet above the tracks, but it came down about 2,500 feet long and 14 or 15 feet deep, and essentially caused a lot of chaos when it hit the tracks and the trains and the community. And most of the community was spared. There were just a few cabins out here where people were killed. But you can see the kind of devastation as things were tumbled down the hill with all that snow and all the power involved in them. Here we are looking uphill. You can just see all the trees that have been sawed off there at the top as the slide came down. You can see various types of equipment. There's an electric coal car. You see these things everywhere. I don't know if you realize what they are, but they're mail sacks, because one of these was a mail train. And so right away, they had to implement protecting and guarding the mail amongst all the rescue and everything. They had to do that also. You can see the conditions. The conditions were not good. And this is at 2 o'clock in the morning. The community had to be woken up, and they have axes and shovels and lights or lanterns, but that was about it. So there were some pretty horrific stories about what happened, and people who escaped and people who didn't escape, and a lot of it has actually been documented, and you can actually read accounts of what it was like. There's a couple of good books have been written in the last 15 years. One of them is called The White Cascade. Another one by Martin Burwasher, a local author, was called V-I-S Major. Means Act of God. And they really describe it well. There's lots of information. The original book, The Northwest Disaster, was by Ruby L. Holt in 1960. Interesting thing about Ruby was she got to interview people who actually were there, children who were there. She was able to meet them and talk to them about it. So again, a very traumatic, kind of over publicized. It's kind of like the media today. The newspapers were doing interviews with people walking out, except some of those interviews had never happened. They were made up because the person they were interviewing actually died in the avalanche. So you had this whipped up media also. You can see they had a lot of snow and they used a lot of dynamite. This is just behind the smoke here. This is Windy Point. Here's a snow shed that's actually been buried. And you can see how much snow has come down on the tracks. And they used car after car of dynamite to loosen the snow because the snow had become so compact it was sort of like bricks, they describe it. And I forget exactly how many cars of dynamite they went through, but it was an enormous amount. Here's a sort of a staged photograph of one of the people who were injured. The first train came in from the east, and everyone took the first train out. If you were injured and you had the option, nobody waited for the train from the west. They all wanted to get on the train that was going east, and they did. And that's how most of the survivors actually left the scene. Here's a sort of a ceremonious picture of the first train from the west. You can see how much snow they were dealing with, but notice on the left center here, you can see there's a catenary bridge, and here's the old coal tower, and so on. But again, you get a feel for the slope. And just look at everything up above here is just completely denuded except for a few snags that are standing. I actually met the family of the man who was engineer on Engineer 1000, and they had some special documents. He also had picked up a few things in the wreckage area, and they actually had those. We have those at the Skykomish Historical Society now. One's even just a brush for someone's hair. It's a little scary to me every time I pick it up because it has the person's initials on it. So that's the thing that gets a lot of publicity at Stevens Pass, but from a railroad point of view, the 7.8-mile tunnel is even a bigger deal, and from an operational point of view, so we'll take a look at that. So look at the bottom right corner first. We had this 2.5-mile tunnel between Cascade Tunnel Station, and notice here they don't call it Wellington, they call it Ty. It's the Ty River there. Nobody wanted to travel through Wellington anymore, and they couldn't move the railroad line, so they just switched the name of the station to call it Ty. So here's the old line, came up here, and here's the proposed new tunnel, or the tunnel they were going to build. And then above it, you can see kind of a pictorial view of it, a little dramatic, but the whole concept was to get at a lower elevation, get away from a lot of this 12 or 14 miles of snowsheds and all this curving and twisting, and put a new tunnel in. And they did several studies, but they finally picked a 8-mile tunnel, and they built it in kind of a unique way. Right closest to it here, they built a pioneer tunnel first. So this is about a 9x9 or 10x9 or whatever it turned out to be tunnel. They started on the west side, and they went towards the east, and then they had crossovers, a whole bunch of crossovers. And then they would come in here and start digging in the main tunnel. All the while, the guys digging from the west portal were working their way this way. And this was a big landslide area, lots of bad soil, very slow going. But as they moved this way, then we had guys coming in here, evacuating this area. But they also went into Mill Creek Valley, and they put a shaft about, I think, 655 feet down. So they were actually then digging this way, they were digging this way, they were digging in all directions. And then at Mill Creek, they actually brought it all out and dumped it in the valley there. So that's what helped them build it as quick as possible. They also, of course, were digging from the east portal in. Enormous water problems on this end. This was the low end, the summit's over here. So the water was all coming this way, and they had just horrible pictures of guys trying to work in, several feet of water. To give you a view of the west portal during construction. Here's the portal right here, the big concrete portal, but here's all their plants and various batch plants and so on. But up here, notice there's this huge camp. This camp is still there today. I mean, if you know where to look, you can walk around up there and you can see piles of metal dishes all rusted together and stuff like that. It clearly was a camp. And they also had camps down the valley for families and so on. This was more of a single man's camp up here. But again, a pretty substantial project on both ends. The Pioneer Tunnel is right here, hard to see, but it's 66 feet over from the center of this one. So the Pioneer Tunnel was also going in here where they were digging over. About 1,000 feet in, this was an old avalanche area here. So about 1,000 feet in across the river, they actually also dug down what they call the Tide River Incline to begin to make progress in the main tunnel also. Kind of a unique, it's a 22-degree angle down to the tunnel where they were working. You can see here's, it's essentially manual labor and a lot of air for their, here they are. I just thought this was kind of neat. There's two pictures of this very similar theme. These guys are putting dynamite. You see the boxes of dynamite around. All these holes have been drilled and they're getting ready for a shot. And when they get this all done, of course, what you see here is you see just wires and cables and everything going everywhere ready to do the shot. And this is called a top heading approach where they kept the top heading below the bottom. But pretty miserable work. The person who took the picture, Lee Pickett, he was the official photographer, and he had the ability to stop work at any time and take pictures. So there's an enormous number of pictures that have been preserved, well preserved at the University of Washington about how this was done and who some of the people were and so on. Here they are. You can see a much more mechanized kind of operation here compared to the first tunnel. This tunnel was built by a general contractor. Company Forces actually built the first tunnel by hand, essentially. But you can see here they all have shovels. They have got electric railway going on there on the left-hand side, and a lot of young men. because the older men didn't last too long down here. They frequently said that they had 250 men per month at both ends resign. And of course, you got a lot better pay down here than you did on the surface, but they just actually people couldn't take it. Again, a ceremonial picture here of the Pioneer Tunnel joining. And this is Frank Kane. And Gary and I got to meet his grandson, who was the foreman of the Mill Creek Shaft. And all of his pictures, all of his family pictures are safely ensconced at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive. So very interesting to talk to him and see what his father's remembrances were and so on. And he has a bunch of good ones. Here's a finished tunnel. It's all fully lined. Again, a staged shot here. And there's plenty of information available about the ceremony they had and all that afterwards and so on. But a big difference from the original tunnel, which was very infrequently lined or lined with just timber. A rather unique thing that happened was on the west side, the new line was going to be in this area about 40 feet above the old line. So they built a big trestle, and as they started digging out of the 8 Mile Tunnel, they just start filling. Well, that actually did not work out too well for the Scenic Hot Springs Hotel, because the new line, once it got filled, actually came down right on the hotel. And it didn't actually knock it over or anything, but they then took it down. We actually have also met a man in Bellingham, and we met a family in Portland who had extensive data about the hotel and remember being there, and they can describe the rooms and so on. It was very fascinating meeting with them. So a lot of this history is also preserved. Now, another element up here that's always a part of this history are the electric locomotives and the whole concept of how they operated and what they did. Remember, you had the 2 Mile Tunnel, and they actually had electric locomotives going through it for a short time during construction of the 8 Mile Tunnel. And they had, of course, more powerful locomotives become available. The original locomotives were had one speed, you might say. The others, as they moved along into the 20s and so on, were more like a real locomotive. But this is a big element of the whole history up there. And they worked from Wenatchee all the way over to Skykomish. They had special power requirements that came in from both ends. They had their own generating plant in the Tumwater Canyon to help feed the electrics. A lot of studies have been done. I helped write a couple of reference sheets about how these things worked and so on. So those are available from the Great Northern Society. But there's a lot of people in Skykomish today that remember these things. They saw them. Some of them went to work on the Great Northern and went right to work on them. So a lot of this memory is still there. And of course, the technical aspects of it are very well preserved. For those of you who have been in Skykomish, or haven't really, look at all the electrics they have here lined up, ready to go to work. For those of you who have been there, this is the Cascadia Hotel. The top floor burned, I don't know, sometime in the 40s, late 40s, I think. So it doesn't have all this. Here's the 4-story Skykomish Hotel, which is there today. Here's the depot, which for many years was on the north side, but has now been moved back to approximately that same location. Here's the frequency converter building that was in town. It's a lot of times called the powerhouse, but it really was a frequency converter station. And here's the roundhouse. But again, a lot going on, lots of men, lots of activity, lots of maintenance, lots of operations 24/7. Here's an interesting picture of the last locomotive, last electric, leaving Skykomish on the way to Wenatchee, and it's pulling out all the other electrics. And this happens to be the Highway 2. And this happens to be Ted Cleveland, a very young brakeman who got a call to ride on the last trip out. And he lives in Skykomish today, very clear mind, really fill us in and does on what's going on. And he usually attends Great Northern Day, and he's full of stories. And if you get a couple of his contemporaries up there, that Great Northern Day about all we do is just listen, because their memories just keep flowing. Here's that frequency converter building. Here's the power coming in from Puget Power up at the Skykomish end. It comes in, and then on the other side of the building, it comes out to where they actually feed the tracks. And there's some rail on the left-hand side here by this big door. There's some rails to bring rail cars in to help service the transformers and so on in there. Well, the rails are still there today, so it's easy to stand right there and imagine what it would have been like. The building actually was decrepit, but survived, I think, until '92 when the railroad finally had it taken down. This is in the Tumwater Canyon, west of Leavenworth, where they also had the old original powerhouse that fed just the tunnel area to begin with. But then after a while, they plugged it in and fed the whole thing, and then it became later a community power station. But you can stand right here today at this location. You can find these footings, and a little picnic area here you can pull in there. So you can get there and kind of lay it out and get a feel for what it might have been like. And of course, they've got excellent signage and maps there. So now I've mentioned Skykomish quite a few times, and I volunteer at their museum. Skykomish is kind of an interesting place that was on the west side. The first name that I've ever seen of Skykomish on a map, a Great Northern map, is literally the name of the location is the flat spot at the end of the 2.2% grade. That's what they called it because they didn't know what else to call it. It had not been named. But you can see a little bit of, they had a big coal tower, and of course there's lots of information about Skykomish. And I think Don Pavia and I have written, I don't know, 8 or 9 reference sheets about it, and we have excellent maps. And but this is a very early sketch, I think 1896, I believe. Very first hotel, very first boarding house. Those are approximately in the same place they were, and so on. There also are some excellent photographs of the same area that came from Dave Sproul and one of the people he knew that essentially verify much of what's going on here. Obviously, later it became a rather important place. Remember, it's the flat spot before the 2.2% grade, or just after it. So this became a big service area. Hundreds and hundreds of men here working for the railroad, and like they do at many other stations, they'd move the division point one place, then move it back. That happened a couple times here too. But just for reference, this is the Skykomish Hotel, which stands there today. And again, I don't know if you can notice it, but right back here is a railroad crossing here from the local railroad line. Again, a very happening place, a lot going on, well preserved, lots of stories. The GN Society has fabulous reference sheets about it. And the stories, in fact, they're about to publish one more. Here, I think it's in June. Going to be the story of the Great Northern Roundhouse at Skykomish. Lee Pickett came up here and took pictures as well. And you can pretty easy to begin to relate where things were there. Here's that logging railroad crossing over. Here's the depot on the south side. This here's the oil tank. This is, by the way, this is the oil tank, and this is the covering of the sump right here. And this is where they unloaded the oil. So this is where all the oil problems started in Skykomish. For those of you who are from around here, you may have heard that the whole area was essentially dug up and dug down 17 feet to take all the oil out and filled back up. But many things in this picture are here today. For example, that house stands today. That's the McAvoy house. Here's the tavern, stands today. It's been rebuilt, but it's exactly the same spot. This is the location of the Cascadia Hotel today. This was a boarding house at the time. And again, Lee Pickett took pictures on top of the water tower here frequently. Here's the depot when it moved to the north side and got expanded and so on. And this is where many of us saw it. It's the first place I actually saw it. Here's the top of the Cascadia. And it moved over there in 22 and then moved back after the oil cleanup to the south side. Quite a family-oriented community, baseball teams, schools, women's clubs, shotgun clubs, grocery stores, all the kind of things you would have to have went on here at Skykomish, and that history is pretty well preserved at the Sky Society. These are the Tegler twins. They were born there, and I got to meet the grandson of the one on the right, who also donated about 500 pictures of the Tegler twins all over Skykomish to help sort of preserve what the family life was there, the community and the society, which is was very, very active. Here's a picture in the 50s, maybe 60s, and again, you can begin to see well-known things. So here's your frequency transformer building. Here's the Skykomish Hotel. That's the McAvoy home. By this time, they have a bridge. You can actually get into town. Prior to that, you had to come up over on the right, the old Cascade Highway. But you can see the 1902 school has been built. This building stands right there today. This is the Maloney Store building, for those of you who have been there. This is where the Skykomish Museum is, right in this location. So there's a good history over time of what actually developed in this community and how it, interacted with the railroad and how it actually was the railroad in most cases. But to end up here, I want to talk a little bit in a historical perspective, you might say. Remember we saw that station up there that was Embro. Here it's called Embro. We saw it as Alvin, and it was covered in the snowshed. So here's the snowshed over the Embro station. You can see the amount of work and men living there that went on. See all these guys washing their face right here, right outside their bunkhouses. In the summer, this got really, really busy. Well, if you were to go up there today, this picture was taken from the top of the snowshed. So the back wall was still there. So I went up there and took the same picture a few years ago. And this is what you see. So here's the back wall of the snowshed, the same place the photographer was. And you can see that Mother Nature's pretty much just taken over. It's my wife down here and another hiker who was with us. So this growth over time is something you have to deal with when you're up there today, looking and trying to understand what was there and what was where and so on. But in downtown Sky, if you want to call it downtown, things are not that much different. Here's your main line. Here's the Skykomish Hotel, built in 1902. It's went through a lot of lives. Different things happened. Today, it's the top 2 floors are empty, but the building is stable. It's got a new roof. It's ready for development. There's a great little coffee shop here today. Here's the Maloney Store building. About same date for, was built. Here's the museum right on the left-hand side. That's where we have our museum. Not a lot has changed today, but if you, recreation has become a big deal. If you go a few miles east to you come to nice great hiking trails, and they put a caboose up there, a Great Northern caboose sitting there at one of the trails, and you can pop right on to the Iron Goat Trail, which again is the old Great Northern Switchback line. So those things have developed. There's lots of hikers to this part of the time of year. There's lots of skiers. Nice ski area has been put in. There's also relics. If you go around, you can find things like this. This was a chicken coop when I was there. And but a farmer takes, a lot of the items have been taken over by farmers, but there's fewer and fewer and fewer of them. And in many cases, you have to have permission. They're hidden away from the roads and so on. But we saw this once before, but I just want to, again, from a historical perspective point of view, take another look at this picture. So notice the rocks on the left-hand side up there, up in the upper left. Well, let's just look at it today. So here comes the BNSF right across the Deception Creek Bridge. There's rocks. So it's pretty easy to take these old pictures, and if, a little exploring and figuring out, you can figure, where you can see similar pictures today. It sort of helps you put the whole thing in view over time. Guy still has Amtrak passenger trains come through twice a day, one to the east, one to the west. And so that's part of the activity there. They also have a lot of snow still. This is a picture I took a few years ago. They had more snow than they wanted. And this year it's been pretty light. I think, I was up there yesterday and there were like 6 inches. And everybody thought it was spring. A lot of freight goes through town. This is actually freight going through during the oil cleanup. And that's a whole different story in Skykomish. A lot of the buildings, including that 4-story hotel, were literally picked up and moved so that they could dig the oil out from underneath them and then put back. And so a lot of that goes on, but you see a lot of stack trains going through there today. And for those of you who like to do that kind of stuff, you can also, there's a camera on the Cascadia Hotel, and you can go out to YouTube or to Virtual Railfan and subscribe, and you can watch the trains run there 24 hours a day today. Looking up the valley a little more from the perspective point of view, here's Highway 2 on the right-hand side, and Stevens Pass would be just to the right. Well, here's the old Great Northern Switchback line right here, and you can see all the concrete back walls that are still standing. Wellington would be like right in this area, sort of center, above the center of the picture. But again, you get this perspective view and where the modern transportation is, and this is, of course, a fabulous recreation trail today, called the Iron Goat Trail. And here's a couple ladies standing there at Windy Point. It's, I don't know, about 2,000 feet down, 1,800 feet to the railroad. You can look down at, this is Highway 2 over here. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hikers and recreation people there in the summer. It's kind of created between that and the snow in the winter, it's created quite a recreation community, I'd say. So just the summary here. We started, here's Wenatchee, here's Leavenworth, Stevens Pass, which we've been sort of focusing on the elements of Stevens Pass, and then down to Skykomish. Sort of the areas we talked about, and we tried to cover those 6 or 8 main items. Of course, there's enough information for any of those elements to talk about a whole presentation. So I think I'll stop sharing here, Jonathan, and we can entertain questions.
Let me get my camera back on. Thanks, Bob. This is just great. So there's been some questions come through on the chat, and also, folks, if you want to turn your camera back on and ask a question, you're certainly welcome to do that. One of the ways I really like people to ask questions is when they raise their hand. You can just see I just did that, and that way I can kind of keep track of who's who and what's what. So one of the first questions, Bob, did the snow sheds have walls on the downhill side to help keep snow from coming back into the rails from that side?
They weren't originally built that way, but very, very soon they put what they called louvers on many of them, which could be chipped open in the summer and then closed in the winter to prevent that snow from coming back in. Not all of them had it, but many of them had it, and there's quite a few actual photographs of them in place too.
Okay, and then Andrew asks a question: was there any kind of ventilation system in the Horseshoe Tunnel?
No, there was no ventilation system in the tunnel. Today, of course, they use big fans and they blow air in and out of the tunnels, but no, it was just Mother Nature and blowing it east and west, and it didn't blow too good based on the few accounts we have. It was always kind of clogged up.
Okay, and I've got another question in the chat, Bob. Do I recall hearing there was a national radio show for the 8-mile tunnel opening? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
They had quite a ceremony, and I think Scott Tanner, some of you know Scott Tanner, has written about it and also lectured about it, and he actually has the audio of the program, and you can actually listen to it. And so he'd be the one I'd defer to for details. But they had quite a party, and they had large groups of people. They had a big banquet that evening. It was a pretty big deal when it happened. There are some interesting stories also. The first electric locomotive that was coming through caught fire on the way through.
Oh.
And got delayed, and they put the fire out, and they still had to kind of use gravity to coast their way through to the bottom because they had a big paper barrier up there they were supposed to smash through. Scott's the guy who has all that information, and especially the radio program, because the GN actually broadcasted radio programs later to people in their cars as they were coming across. So it has the whole story.
Okay. And then a question from me, Bob. You know, I always kind of like Frederick Mears, and he was involved in the tunnel. What did Mears do? What was he in charge or what?
He was in charge. Yeah, the head contractor's building. Mears was the guy representing the contractor and the Great Northern. There's lots of other stories have survived about the sub-engineers and the people who had were more, you might say, more vocal later about the conditions and so on. If you take a look at some of those, there were lots of disagreements and papers presented at the American Association of Civil Engineers and so on. And some of the papers weren't too civil about the situation, but it was a stressful situation. It was like the equivalent of going to the moon or something, I suppose.
All right. Well, gosh, folks, it's a very interesting program by Andrew has just posted the website for Scott Tanner, so people can contact that.
Yeah.
And, you know, just a very fortunate opportunity for us to spend some time with one of the preeminent experts on Stevens Pass and the Great Northern in that area, Bob Kelly. Mike Inkelhofer, go ahead. Inkelhofer.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Nice. Good to see you, Mike.
Very good. I'm doing fine. I just wanted to mention when I was a kid, I had an opportunity to walk through the Pioneer Tunnel portion of the 7.8-mile tunnel. My father was a bridge engineer for the railroad, and his responsibilities also included tunnels. And I guess they did an annual inspection, and one summer I walked through with them. We all had hip boots, and you could walk through the Pioneer Tunnel. The rails were gone, but the ties were still there from the narrow gauge railroad. And you had to step very carefully because occasionally a tie was missing, and then you'd go in the water up to your hips. Mostly you just walked on top of the ties, and the water was less than knee high. So that was quite an experience. I feel fortunate to have done that. That is all.
Yeah, I'm trying, by the way, everybody, I'm trying to convince Mike to be one of the presenters at the convention this fall. He's an expert on all the stories of building Bridge 4 in Seattle there at Ballard, and I'm trying to get him teamed up with the guy who's writing a reference sheet about it. So we're looking forward to start you guys the story, Mike.
Hey, this is Kent. I have heard Mike and seen Mike do that very presentation, and the gods of railroading will never forgive him if he doesn't do that presentation for you guys. Not to overstate it or anything.
Yeah. So John Mantle, John, did you have your hand up? John Mantle, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, but
go ahead.
on a different subject.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we can if it's with me, we can connect by email or something, John.
Right. Yeah. So, gosh, you know, that's just a great program. Seeing a lot of positive feedback in the chat, Bob. Just a wonderful show this was, and you know, really good attendance on a just absolutely beautiful day. Hey, one thing before I start letting people go for the day, Joel McCurry in Cary, North Carolina. How did you know I was going to call on you? Ask your question and then tell us what the weather's like.
Okay, so Bob, why don't you have on your Skykomish hat?
I was going to comment about your hat, and I was just looking for mine, but I've left it somewhere. I had it on earlier this morning. By the way, some of you who have been to Skykomish can be honored with a Skykomish hat. And Joel was one of those guys who's been there, so he's got one.
There you go. And you've got some, now are you doing anything this spring up at Skykomish, Bob?
Actually, one of the first things that'll happen up there will be in June. The Great Northern and Railroad up there is a little community railroad that runs Great Northern and Cascade, runs on 7-inch track. They'll be having James J. Hill Day coming up. And then there's a Tunnel Days, kind of a community event that goes on up there. So one day kind of a classic town parade with kids and wagons and stuff. And then through the summer, they have their standard old timers and events and so on. The museum is open in Skykomish from May 1st through October on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. So if you happen to be up there, pop into the Skykomish Museum, and there'll be someone there who can explain some of this to you. We have an excellent presentation on one of the walls there, building the 8-mile tunnel. It's just fabulous.
All right, and I see Alan Miller and George Foster have their hands up. I've just switched back to a gallery view. George got his hand up before Alan, so George, you go first. First, how's the weather in Hermiston?
It's cloudy and probably around 50 degrees. So, nice summer day.
There you go.
And,
And your question, please.
Yeah, so my apologies for joining the party late. Time got away from me. So what I had question for Bob is concerning the comments about the oil. So what happened there to cause all that issue?
Well, the first thump in town, they bring the oil into town and park it in an unloading station, and they actually had to heat it. It was, they had to heat it before they could put it in the tank. Well, the first, they would pump it into a sump, and then in the sump, they'd begin to heat it and then pump it up to the first sump was made of railroad ties. And then they decided that wasn't so good, so they built a concrete sump, but it immediately started cracking. So they had also, the crew would come to town, they'd start unloading, they'd decide to go have beans, and they'd come back and it'd be flowing out the top of the sump, So you do that for 100 years, and then later you do a similar thing with diesel, and pretty soon it gets in the river. So that's what that was all about. It's kind of an interesting story about it. The kids in town made a video about it that's a school, and they entered it in some environmental contest, and they won the national prize, and they got to meet the President of the United States, and they asked him for help. So that's how sort of the modern era of the help arrived. But Dave Sproul shared with me in the past some letters from the 20s where people would put in a septic tank, and the next morning after they cover it all up, it'd be floating on the surface, floating on oil, that is. So there's lots of documented evidence of an oil problem there for a long time, but that's what went on. They had to actually literally move the majority of the buildings in town, including very big buildings, and dig down about 17 or 18 feet to get below it. They had to build a coffer dam in the river and dig down, same kind of thing, and then rebuild all this. They had to haul all the old rocks away to the special cleaning facility in Oregon, where they cleaned them and then they could use them for other things, but they couldn't put them back in the ground. So quite a story in itself.
So that was Bunker C fuel, right?
Yeah, and they had a lot of Bunker C, liquid Bunker C. I think 37,000 gallons of liquid oil they pumped out of the ground and took it to the refinery, actually.
All right, thank you.
So thank you, George. And Alan Miller, weather conditions in Darrington, and then your question, please.
We're 43 degrees and raining hard.
Okay.
My question was, maybe I missed it, but the building that Bob called the chicken coop was obviously a depot at one time. I was wondering what depot that was.
Oh boy, I wonder if I can remember. I want to say Merritt. I think that was the Merritt Depot.
Okay.
Because doesn't the Winton Depot still
Oh, it's
exist?
Winton. Yeah, Winton Depot. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan. Dan is, by the way, one of the guys who taught me all about this place up there as I started learning about it. But at 76 years old, I'm starting to lose it.
Yeah, there you go. So
Bob, 5 years older than me.
So we're getting down to the bottom of the hour. I just kind of want to go around and check. So Dave Sproul, what's it like in Warren, Oregon today?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, just like Darrington, Washington. It's about 50 degrees and it's raining like cats and dogs.
Okay. And Dave Johnson in Mason City, Iowa, what's it like there in the land of corn?
Well, we here a few days ago, we were up into almost 70 degrees, and last night a cold front went through and we got a little skift of snow, and it was about 2 degrees this morning.
Oh my, oh my. Yeah, things kind of move around it. And just give me a second. And then Joel McCurry, I didn't get the weather forecast in Cary, North Carolina yet.
68 and cloudy, very cloudy.
Okay. And George Foster, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to give this one to Dave Sproul. Dave, if you look behind me, you'll see the thing that we talked about on Facebook.
There you
Yeah, I
go.
see that. That's very ecumenical of you to put up a Great Northern locomotive like that.
Yeah,
Oh,
George being
well.
a former UP engineer. So,
Yeah, well, I got my part of it there.
all right. Do we have anything more for the good of the order from our audience today? I'm, getting to the bottom of the hour and we're men and sometimes we need to go. So,
I had
yeah.
I had a couple internet outages, but all in all, is one of the best programs that I've heard for a long time, and I don't regret a second of the time spent listening to it.
Well, that is a testimonial, Bob, because Dave is certainly a knowledgeable guy. That's a very impressive comment. Trent Stetz, what's it like in the Rose City today?
51 and partly cloudy, slight drizzle.
There you go. Fantastic. All right. Well, guys,
Jonathan?
Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, I mean, goodness gracious, we didn't check in lovely downtown Kirkland, Washington, population -6.
Okay.
Salute. Anyway, I just wanted to say I really have appreciated Bob's partnership as we work on our partially joint convention. And we're making good progress and hoping to have a good time for people in September as well in Everett. We're working on our presenters and have been really happy with how easy the folks at Snoqualmie have been to work with to get the excursion together. It's just working out great. Thanks to Kurt, Dean, lots of different people helping out on the convention, and there's more to come.
Great. And Jim has his hand up. Jim, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I'm with my father, Jim.
Oh, sorry,
my name is Faye.
Okay.
No, it's okay. I had to log him in twice so we could watch together. But we live in Bothell and we camp out in the areas very often. And my dad's very into the history. And I read the White Cascade, and I was wondering if because we logged in a little late, did you have any photos of the giant, the rigs that would clear the snow for the locomotives?
Yeah,
those were always fascinating to me.
Yeah, they used the rotary snow plows, and I think I might actually have used one of the same photos that Gary Christ used in his book too.
Okay.
But, essentially, there's lots of pictures of those, and we have a lot more at Skykomish. If you'd like some of them, you can just contact Jonathan, and we'll send some to you.
Yeah, just put something in the chat. We'll see what we can do. I've got a couple of hands. Did you finish your question?
Great.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Dave Sproul has his hand up, and then Trent.
Well, I have a confession to make. First of all, Bob, really good job. Thank you. And as you mentioned that I had given you some paperwork on the oil pollution. Thank you for not ratting me out, but I'm going to confess that my uncle Billy Dunstan, the game warden up there in 1929, had a hand in that. People started complaining about seeing an oil sheen in the river, so the state game department sent Uncle Billy up there, and he met with some Great Northern people, and this is documented in paperwork, and they saw the oil sheen, and yeah, something's wrong, all right. Well, Uncle Billy covered it up. He didn't make a report. He was a former Great Northern employee, and he decided it wasn't worth saying anything about, and that's in the paperwork. So thank you for not mentioning that, because I'd have been embarrassed if anybody knew.
Nice job. Nice job. Yeah, thanks, Dave. And over to Trent. Trent, go ahead.
You folks are talking about all the great conventions coming up. I just wanted to add the SPNS Historical Society convention will be before the NP convention in Spokane. The date's to be determined, but it'll be before the NP convention. So guys can spend lots of time roaming around Washington in early September.
That is great news, and I'm glad that we got that plug in there for the SPNS Society, our two-state railroad. So, okay, well, we're right at the bottom of the hour, and so I'm at this point I did want to mention that Jack Christensen has a painting, Jack, of is that a Great Northern box cab behind you? You're muted right now, Jack, so you got to unmute. Jack, you're muted. So this is all I can do. There we go. Still can't hear you, Jack. I know. Porchlight, did you have something more? You still got your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, Jack. Is that a Great Northern painting?
Well, yeah, I hung that up there because we were talking Great Northern today. Garrett, we have note cards on the NP. I've got about 14 of them available on the website. And I've got a couple of Great Northern images. Gary Tarbox photographed this painting. And I'd like to mention to Bob Kelly, if you want to make note cards, I have a sample of one. It's behind the picture here. And he has the images. If you want to reproduce it, there's no charge for it, just whatever you want to do. I also have another I've done a number of Great Northerns. One from Minnesota, and I have one of our twos on the Kootenai. I don't have access to those. My daughter has a P2 on the coastline coming out of Everett. If you'd like to reproduce that, we'll photograph it for you. But
all right, I got one in my living room too.
Yeah, that sounds great, Jack.
Well, if you want to make, I don't know if you want to make those note cards, people use them for Christmas cards, and this is a snow scene. I think there's a note card. Let's see.
Careful with that.
Yeah, I've used them all the time. I buy them from the NP store.
I know that Gary has got the image of it because
hold it right there. You go. Perfect.
Cards.
We can see it, Jack. That's perfect. Thank
It's
you.
the reverse image. This is
That's
coming
okay.
out. The title is East Portal. It's coming out of the East Portal right at the top of the hill before you head down into Burn.
Thanks, Jack.
I never thought on the NP when I saw in Everett, when the Everett turn, watching all those big orange trains go by. It'd be interesting to go through that tunnel, but I'll probably never do it. I didn't realize that I was going to make hundreds of trips through the 8-mile tunnel. And I did was when I came back from Montana after being resigned from a supervisor job at Livingston. Of course, I had to learn the Great Northern. We were allowed 4 pilot trips. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but if you were on the other railroad, the union agreement for the merger, you were allowed 4 trips with a pilot to learn the line. And so I finally, all I could hold was the extra board with 28 years service. So anyway, I was on the extra board. I was called for Wenatchee empty drag with a couple SD40s, and they didn't have an extra engineer on the GM, so they moved the chain gang guy. He was an old head. That was Al Abdo. His 2 sons were Great Northern engineers. I think they're all retired now. Anyway, we headed over to Wenatchee and he said, well, if we get up to Skykomish, we're going to put the helper on the point. We needed a helper. We had 130 empty train cars. And he said, Witter is the helper engineer. He knows the mountain better than anybody. You go up and he'll tell you about it, and I'll run this engine back here for you. And okay, so, and whenever they cut the helper off, I'll take over again. Well, it said the dispatcher ran the helper all the way to Wenatchee that day. So we tied up, and Al Abdo says, now you're going to get the most important part of your student trip. We're going over to Wally's for chicken and beer. And that was my increase. And all the Great Northern trainmen, I think without exception, were welcoming and helpful. I made I made a second student trip. I was supposed to have 4. And something came up and I forget the name of the gal at Interbase. She's a Barbara, tough customer. I told her they called me for something, I don't know what had she. And I said, well, I've only had 2 familiarization trips. Well, you're gonna go anyway. So I did, and you know, the Great Northern was pretty well engineered, and it was actually pretty easy to learn. And I don't know how many trips you figure 10 a month, that'd be 20 times through that tunnel.
Yeah.
And in the 27 years after I came back to Seattle, I would say about half of it was over Great Northern Territory. So even 25 or 30%, figure out the number of trips I've been through that thing. And they had some tough gigs there. They were running in-train helpers on those eastbound. Imagine sitting on 3 units in the middle of a train, sucking up all that diesel smoke from 4 high horsepower units on the head end. And you had a little cloth mask. And I said, you guys have actually been doing this all the time? That was a long time ago, though. But, I'm a pretty big Great Northern fan because they were quite, without exception, they were so helpful. I remember old Duke Durr, he's an old head conductor, and he said, yeah, he says you slammed us around a little bit at first, but nobody said anything.
Well, thank you, Jack.
Thanks,
George Foster wants to join in. George, go ahead.
Just thought I'd throw that out because, like I say, I should be a Great Northern fan. I did belong to it for a while, but I couldn't handle two groups at once.
There you go. George.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I worked with a conductor on the UP that had been at the GN starting around 64. His name was Rex Allen. We all called him Sexy Rexy, but he looked like a real tall version of John Denver. And anyway, but yeah, Rex would tell me about trips through the Cascade Tunnel, you know, and they'd get the train in there, especially eastbound, and then close the doors and, you know, and start ventilating the shaft and everything, or the tunnel, and then they come out the east end. And of course, it was like a big rush of air with your ears and all that. So it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, well, Bud Rhodes, he was one of their regular conductors on the Hill Pool, and he hung a moniker. He used to call me Scrap Iron, but the moniker really didn't stick. So,
gosh, guys, this is great.
They were the Great Northern Trainmen. They were a pretty professional group. I hate to say it, but I think they were a little bit more gung-ho than our guys were.
I'm going to write that down, Jack.
There you go. Now, Dave Sprout, Porchlight, do you have something for us? I see a hand up.
Yeah, about George's comment about the door opening. What you used to see at Bern when an eastbound would come out of the tunnel, the door would come open, the eastbound would come out of the tunnel. Every window of the locomotive that had somebody inside it would be open with a guy hanging out the window with his tongue hanging out, trying to get some fresh air. I mean, you could dependably see that. It's just the way it was.
There you go.
It wasn't too bad on the point, but as those helper crews really, I did have to go up there and take a student trip on the helper. And the pilot I had was Tom Speckman. The first thing he said to me, he says, I wonder who this guy has been bumping me here lately. But actually, we became pretty fast friends, and we used to take him out fishing. Tommy, his career was kind of cut off. I felt kind of responsible. We were good friends, and we used to have job selection sheets. And I was working the Empire Builder, and I wanted to go on this local out of Delta for the winter. And I told Tom, I says, I think you're about good enough seniority to get that job. You got it on your job selection sheet. He did, and he did get the job. And on one of the trips leaving Edmonds, there was an old gentleman trespassing on the railroad, and they hit him. And they didn't kill him. Of course, they put the Empire Builder in emergency, and fireman Davy Benson, he was an old NP hog that he was restricted. He went back to see how the guy was doing, and they came back up to the engine. Tom was laying down on the nose on the toilet. He'd had a heart attack. He had a heart condition, and he neglected to get it fixed. And I always felt kind of responsible. He was one of the few engineer friends that I made. I was pretty close to him, and also R.J. Smith, who was kind of the dean of Great Northern Hogheads out of Seattle. He could hold passenger, but he preferred the freight pool. And he was a real enthusiast, loved the job. That's enough old heading. Part of this was true.
Part of this is true, Jack. Don't kid a kidder. Joel, did you have something more? You had your hand up a second ago.
At one of the Great Northern Conventions, someone on this Zoom meeting was telling us about some of this stuff, and I remember him saying that he was on the lead locomotives, and he went back 2 or 3 locomotives to check on something, and when he got back there was a hobo back there, and they were getting ready to go into the tunnel, and so he just handed him a handkerchief and wet it down and said, "You better wear this," and went on back up.
Yeah, that tunnel is quite something. So, well, great conversation after a great presentation, and gosh, what a lot of fun. What a great way to spend a kind of rainy, cold February 28th kind of day. It's my daughter's birthday. The good doctor is 29 this year. So other than that, it's been a great day here in West Seattle, watching it rain. And gosh, what can I tell you? Come back in 2 weeks. We're going to have Trent, and we're going to have a really great program. We're going to have a really big shoe, as they say. And I want to thank everybody for being here today at the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive biweekly Zoom meeting. I'm your host and moderator, Jonathan Fisher. And going once, going twice, all I'm going to say is look forward to seeing you all next time. And thanks for all being here today. So bye for now.